Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining this session, powering up the potential for community renewables in the south of Scotland. It's been an interesting few days with the storm, and I, for one, have also been affected, so it's been a slightly frantic morning getting geared up for this, but we're here now, so hopefully we've got a really full session for you. We've got some great speakers, and unfortunately one of our speakers also has been affected by the storm, so can't make today. So Mark Brennan unfortunately can't join us, but he has offered to do another session for us on shared ownership, which would be really interesting. So we'll certainly be looking at doing that. So this session today is going to last for an hour, from 2 till 3. Just to let you know that there will hopefully be some time now for some question and answers at the end of the session. So if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A function. You can also use the chat function to speak to others in the webinar during the session. And we also have captions available as well, which you can turn on and off by clicking the CC live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. So just as participants start filling in, I will just give you a brief overview. I'm sure many of you already know Community Land Scotland. My name's Amy Hesp, and I'm the South of Scotland Development Officer for Community Land Scotland. We are the collective voice for land and asset owners in Scotland. And what we do is we become a sort of a network for groups. We support aspiring groups who want to purchase land or assets, and we also influence policy on land reform. In the South, my role is to really connect up community groups and build a strong network across the South, as well as raise awareness to those who don't know what community ownership is, and just share knowledge and best practice between groups, which is partly our session today. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker. We've got Benny Talbot, who's the Innovation Manager at Community Energy Scotland. So Benny, if you'd like to join us, I'll stop sharing. And I'll hand over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to spend a few seconds faffing as I put my screen share on, but it's great to be speaking to you all. Right, so hopefully you can all now see the first slide of my presentation. So yeah, I work for Community Energy Scotland, and Community Energy Scotland, if the slides will move forward. Yeah, so we're a membership-based charity. We exist to promote and support community energy across Scotland. You'll see on this slide our mission. I guess in general, we work through a number of different ways, both with partnering individual community groups to help progress a project, particularly where that project is breaking new ground and looking at something that will benefit other community groups. We'll do advocacy work, and we'll do education and capacity building work. Before I go into my main presentation, I just want to mention a couple of projects that we've got that might be of particular relevance. So I believe this presentation is focused particularly on community groups in the south of Scotland. So I wanted to flag Network 76 in Motion, which is a new project that we've started with 6 communities across Dumfries and Galloway and East Ayrshire, looking at collective solutions to low carbon transport. And we're actually recruiting at the moment for a development officer based locally to lead this project. So if you know anyone, then it would be great if you could pass on the news, and there's a link in this slide, because yeah, we want to make sure we get really good local candidates. In general, so Community Energy Futures is our support program, which we run with cohorts of representatives of community energy groups that want to work in the community energy field. and you can find out more information on www.kefscot. The presentation I'm about to run is much shorter, and kind of in general it's maybe slightly simpler than some of the KEF material, but it's an introduction to the sorts of things we'll be looking at in KEF, which is aimed at upskilling people to be able to launch community energy projects. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about solar PV on buildings, because if you're interested in launching a community energy project, this is probably the easiest and first place you might want to start thinking about it, provided of course you've got a suitable building. There's many other sorts of community energy, which I imagine you're going to hear about some of them later in this session. This certainly isn't the only thing you can do, but in the time I've got, I thought it would be useful to talk about this. We're going to talk about assessing sites into the grid, self-use of energy that you generate, and how to start estimating the performance of your system before making a decision. I apologize in advance that for some people this will probably be old news, and I'm sure some people on this call have already been through this process, but I've tried to pitch this at a level that's useful to a range of people. So the first thing to think about when you are considering a solar PV project is your site. So where the panels are physically going to go, which includes ground-mounted or roof-mounted options, both of which have implications in terms of cost, maintenance, access. For roof-mounted in particular, if you're working on a roof anyway and you'll have scaffolding up, that could be a really good opportunity to put solar PV up and reduce the cost of the installation, because the scaffolding costs are quite significant. Planning permission will depend significantly on whether you are in a conservation area or have a listed building or not, and some installations will be permitted development. And then shading, I think if you have a shaded site or partially shaded site, SunPath charts are a really good way to have a look at how shaded that will be. So of course you can also ask an installer or an expert if you don't feel confident playing around with that sort of thing. One interesting thing to think about is traditionally, well, most solar arrays will be installed south facing, but if you want to maximize self-use, as we'll talk about later, having an array with some panels facing southeast or southwest can actually be quite good, because even though there's overall less energy generated, you'll generate more in the mornings for a southeast panel and in the evenings for a southwest panel, which might mean you're able to generate at the same time as you're using energy, and self-use would be increased. Connecting to the grid, there's a threshold between what's called a G98 and a G99 connection. So if your installation is under a certain size, which is 3.68 kilowatts for a single phase installation or 11 kilowatt for a 3-phase installation, then it's a very simple process. It's kind of called connect and notify. So your installer will be able to connect the panels and then notify the grid company that they've installed. Whereas if it's above that, then there's a slightly more complicated connections process, which involves applying in advance. And if there are local constraints on the grid, could then require you to pay money or wait for upgrades. All of these things you can talk to an installer and get advice on, but it's really useful to know the sorts of things that might come up in advance. So I've mentioned single or 3-phase. It's quite simple to tell whether you have a single or a 3-phase connection if you're not sure. I've included a link to a photo guide on this slide. And essentially it's about whether you've got 3 different cables coming in or one live cable and one neutral. But the photo guide will explain more. So it's really So when you're installing solar PV, you have to think about the finances and whether an installation will add up or whether you need to subsidize it. So there's a really big difference between the wholesale price of energy, which is 5p per unit roughly, quite a small amount compared to what you'd pay your supplier, because the rest of that cost comes from maintaining the network. It comes from social and environmental obligations, the smart meter rollout, various other charges applied with and alongside an electricity bill. If you self-use energy, then you won't need to pay any of those charges because you won't be buying it in from a supplier, you'll just be using energy that you've generated yourself. So the value of energy to use self-used is quite large compared to what you will receive for selling that energy to the grid, which will be through the smart export guarantee and will be likely to be around that 5p, possibly less. So that's why it's so important to think about self-use when you're installing solar PV, and you'll want to size your array to size your solar installation to try and maximize self-use. Of course, there's other economics of scale to consider, such as the sunk costs in the scaffolding and in the inverter, so it will always be a balance. But ideally, if you can get 80% self-use from your installation, you'll be in a really good position. Batteries can help to maximize self-use by shifting your generation, storing it until later in the day when you need to use it. On the other hand, if you're thinking of installing a large load in future, such as an electric vehicle charge point, now when considering self-use is a good time to be aware of that. So if you're modeling, well, if you want to make an installation, you'll need to check the finances and find out as much as possible about how it'll perform before making the final decision. And you'll do this by essentially modeling the installation.
So it looks like we may have lost Benny there. So whilst we try and reconnect to Benny, I think the best thing we can do is to go on to our next speaker, which will be Reid from Action Porty in Edinburgh. And Al has also been going down the journey of using solar panels. So whilst Benny was just getting into the full swing of his solar panel explanation, Al can give us some real life details about their journey of installing their panels and other renewable energy schemes that they've been working on, and we'll work on trying to get Benny back. So Al, if you're okay to take over from here for now, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. I hope you can all see this okay. I was rather late joining this, so we haven't tested this, but let's give it a go, and please let me know in the chat if you can't see what's going on. That should be showing.
That's great, Al, that's working.
Okay, is it showing you the whole screen? It should be, it's taking its time. Okay. That doesn't appear to be showing the whole screen for some reason or another, but I will push on.
It's still pretty clear, that's not bad.
If that's okay with everyone.
Yeah.
So really just good afternoon, everyone. And I apologize in advance. I'm actually quite hoarse today, so please just bear with me. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and I've got lots of photos of sort of nice shiny kit. As Meg said, I'm a board member at Action Porty, and we have recently installed 20 kilowatts of solar PV and back that up with 20 kilowatt hour batteries. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that today. But the first thing to say is just to give you a little bit of context. This is Portobello in Edinburgh. And we are, as you can see, Edinburgh's seaside, large beach to the north, and Action Porty's building, which is a former church and halls, isn't actually visible, but it's in at the back of this photograph here. And here is the building. So you can see it's a listed building. So what Benny was talking about is actually very pertinent, because it is a grade B listed building in a conservation area. So we have a number of challenges in relation to that. You can see, if we go in sort of clockwise from the left, you can see the front of the Celebration Hall, the former church, and then the aerial photograph is the footprint of the building, which is about 1 acre, which isn't massive in terms of land reform and land reform assets, but it is in the centre of really quite a heavily built up area. And the bottom right hand photograph is a panorama taken actually from my wall, from my house. I live directly opposite, with, you can see the beach and the prom at the bottom of the road just there, if you can see my cursor. And then to the left of the building behind these cherry trees is our halls, where our solar panels are fitted. And this is a slide very briefly just of the that I actually stole from another previous recent presentation for a partnership with another organization in Portobello called Porty Community Energy. But if I have time, I will get to that, or I can talk about that in the chat Q&A at the end. But you can see here that we're quite central in the whole area of our community. The boundary is shown there. We have, Action Porty has over 500 members covering an area of around 10 square kilometres with a population of approximately 10,000. And that gives you a feeling for kind of how built up it is, but in quite a unique context, with a large sandy beach sort of immediately to our north, and still in 15 minutes from the centre of the capital city. So just to give you a flavour of what we've been doing, obviously I'm here today to talk predominantly about solar PV and about the battery storage capacity that we've installed. Excuse me. But I think the thing is to see this not just in isolation, that it's in context of our whole energy approach. And this is in keeping with the Scottish Government's energy strategy, and not just considering electricity generation on its own, but considering reducing consumption in the first place, both of electricity and of heat. So we have solar PV, we have battery storage, and I'll get on to the funding aspects of that later, but we have also insulated significantly the former church building from the Landfill Communities Fund, as well as starting to install secondary glazing to insulate the very large windows of the former church. And as you might imagine, in a grade B listed building, that's no small feat to fund and install these insulating measures. And we're also working with Cycling Scotland, who have funded our e-cargo bike project. And we're currently battling with the Edinburgh City archaeologists to get permission to build e-cargo bike storage. I suppose one of the key things that I would say in relation to this is that it's not just an Action Porty project or endeavour that actually relying on expertise and support from other organisations is fundamentally important to us. So, as I mentioned previously, we work with Porty Community Energy, but we're also working with Sustrans for cargo bike loans, and with Spokes, the campaign for cyclists. So here's our solar PV installation. Now that's on the roof of the large hall, which you saw a couple of slides ago in aerial form. And these PV cells are east-west facing, precisely for the reasons that Benny was outlining earlier, because we wanted to smooth our generation over the day, and just to be sure that we could maximize self-use. So we have 20 kilowatts of solar PV installed there. And actually, you might notice that there is a very, very large roof on the former church, very large roof on the former church, which is almost exactly south facing. So we have potential for significantly more solar PV, and I will get to our plans for that hopefully a little bit later on. So moving on from the solar PV, this is what 20 kilowatt hours or 20 kilowatt hours of capacity and battery storage looks like, courtesy of Storterra, which is a local company, an Edinburgh-based company. And incidentally, actually, it was interesting that this was per kilowatt hour a good bit cheaper than a Tesla battery, and we were delighted to be able to use a local firm for a number of reasons in relation to this. So what I'm going to try and do now is I'm going to try and minimize this and just show you some of our generation. Now, I hope you can all see that. Please let me know if you can't, but this is the inverter that we use with our solar PV. And this is a sort of fully automated Wi-Fi enabled app that allows me and any other board members to check in with what we're generating. So it's strangely addictive to have a look at what you're generating on a particularly sunny day. But I won't go into this in too much detail, but it's worth noting that apart from them telling you kind of quite how many kilos of carbon you've saved and the equivalent how many trees you've planted, although I'm not totally sure of the methodology behind that, it also shows you quite neatly across all of the months what your generation and consumption has been. And you can see across all of these months that in fact there are really only September, well actually October, November and December, I would imagine, where we are not largely or predominantly self-sufficient. Now obviously this year has been slightly skewed by the lockdowns in January and February. I expect that would look different. That will look different next year if we're still operating, but that just gives you a feeling for what's been going on. And you can see if we go to the monthly generation here, you can see that we're obviously this month we've been consuming quite a bit more than we have produced. But if I go to, let's say, July, which was pretty sunny, you can see our solar production against that. So there is a significant advantage, in fact, and I'll get to the costs a little bit later on, but we paid an extra $2.5 grand, I think, or $3 grand for this app in particular. So it does help us monitor it, and it also helps community engagement as well, helps our members know what's going on, and we have links to this from our website. So if I go back to the PowerPoint presentation, now we've only recently had these batteries installed and we're not fully up and running with them yet, but when we get our there's still some snagging to do, I think it's fair to say, to have them fully integrated with the solar PV, but it's certainly part of our bigger picture approach, and part of that is actually how we decide what we do about heating the building and about decarbonising our heat supply as well, which is quite a thorny issue for a very old building. So this is my penultimate slide. I'm just going to run through some of the costs. I mean, it all kind of sets it out there, but essentially the total cost of the whole solar PV project was just over £30,000. About £22,000 of that was the actual kit itself, and there was about 7 or 8 grand's worth of costs added to that in relation to planning, in relation to architects' fees, in relation to an arborist's report for shading, in relation to grid connection costs, etc., etc. So it's just over 30 grand in total, and we were very close to just taking out a full loan for that. So for that full £30,000, because the costs all added up, but with about 4 or 5 weeks to go before signing for that full loan, my apologies, signing for that full loan, the Scottish Power Energy Network's Green Economy Fund came up and offered us 18 grand. So we weren't, that's not to be sniffed at in the slightest, so we were delighted to take that. The Energy Saving Trust loan is paid back at £155 a month over 7 years. But actually, if you offset that against the feed-in tariffs, so I mean, Benny was talking earlier about the Smart Export Guarantee. We were lucky enough just to get registered in time to benefit from the feed-in tariff, which gives us back about £620 a year. And the savings against that in relation to what we've installed are about £1,500 a year. So there's a net gain there. The battery storage itself was fully grant funded, 50% funded by the Keir's Innovation Fund, that's the Community and Renewable Energy Scotland Innovation Fund, and also by the Development Trust Association Green Shoots Recovery Fund. And we were delighted to have funding from SPEN, from Keir's and from DTAS in relation to this. So just to wind up, key points to note are that grid connections are not always available. We only got a grid connection because the local primary school didn't install as much as they thought they would. Therefore, there was bandwidth available, there was space available for the local grid connection. And we in Portobello are desperately in need of a grid upgrade because there are a number of projects that Porty Community Energy and Belfield want to do. And without a grid connection, we can't feasibly do that. Actually, ultimately, and again, Benny, I know mentioned the issue of listed building consent and planning and conservation areas, but we were considered, this was considered to be permitted development by the council, which took everyone a bit by surprise, including the architects who sketched it up for us and applied. But ultimately, we hope that permitted development might also be brought to bear if we do decide to put solar panels on the south-facing roof of the former church. And as I pointed out earlier, that there are extra costs as well, and Benny spoke about this, building warrant, planning consent, grid connection, all of these things. So if you bear with me, there's just one more point I would make in terms of whether it adds up, and to answer this question, does it add up? Well, obviously the figures all add up there, but there's also a considerable amount of momentum that comes with investing in renewables. So for ourselves at Action Porty, what that has allowed us to do is to build projects and narratives around the climate crisis and the ecological crisis and achieving net zero, and communities being involved in owning assets and in being resilient in the face of these crises. So the slide that I showed earlier with the Porty Community Energy logo on it, we recently got down to the final shortlist, I think 4 or 5 projects for Centrica's Energy for Tomorrow Fund, which was more than £100,000 over 3 years, and that our plan was to have community-owned EV charging at Action Porty. That ultimately didn't come to pass, but it was still a very worthwhile exercise, and it allowed us to become clearer in our minds what our role was in the community in relation to net zero, in relation to decarbonisation, and allowed us to pitch for a significant fund and get to shortlist, whereby otherwise we wouldn't, I don't think, have made it that far. So that's me. Thank you very much for your time. Meg, shall I hand back to you and to hand back to Benny? Would that be the easiest thing to do? I will stop sharing my screen there.
Thank you so much, Al. Thank you for jumping in last minute there when we lost Benny, and well done for Benny to getting back online. We are really having challenges with this webinar. So I'll hand back to Benny if you're able to pick up where you left off, Benny, and over to you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I have no idea what happened, but my internet just disappeared. I might have been speaking to nobody for a while, but I believe I was at, let me just share the screen, at this stage of my presentation, which is the section on modelling the installation. Could somebody tell me, is that right?
That's great, Benny. Yeah.
Great. So, just get my notes up. Yes. So, so before you go ahead, you're going to want to model your installation and check whether it'll add up in terms of how long it will take to pay back the money that you've put in and how much self-use you're likely to get. So installers will be useful in being able to provide you with an estimate, but it's really, really good to be able to understand that yourself and to be able to check what you're receiving from installers, understand how they've got there, and be able to do some modelling of your own. So there's various different tools you can use. There's very simple online tools, such as there's one which the Energy Saving Trust offer on their website, which is linked on this slide, and that is very user-friendly. Kind of, it should take you through some simple assumptions and allow you to model your installation, find out how much energy you'll get out, and potentially how much self-use you'll get within under 10 minutes, I'd say. Then there's more complicated models that give more detailed information, such as RET screen, which I've also linked to here, that will allow you to get out a really detailed time series of exactly when your solar panels would generate and to feed in more complicated assumptions about when you'd use energy. So I'm quickly just going to go through what you're likely to see coming out of one of these models. Because this is very similar to what you're likely to see from an energy supplier, from an installer if they quote for you. So there'll be various key stats which include this amount of saving on your bill. Al showed that in his presentation. It was really useful actually seeing all of this theory kind of taken through in practice, a real life situation. But yeah, so the percentage saving or the physical amount of the cost saving on your electricity bill and your income, which will be from the Smart Export Guarantee. It's worth checking what rate the model is assuming for the Smart Export Guarantee, because that changes. The Smart Export Guarantee isn't fixed, and it will change over time. You won't be able to be sure exactly what you'll get from it, but you can look up rates offered by current suppliers and use that as your starting point. So you'll also see the total cost, which is a mixture of installation cost and maintenance cost. The maintenance cost is normally an assumption that you'll need to replace the inverter once during the lifetime of the project. And net benefit. This could be calculated as a lifetime calculation, which normally means over 25 years. The net loss or benefit, or it could be in terms of what's called payback, which is how long it will take before the amount of money you've put in gets returned to you in savings on your bills and payments from the Smart Export Guarantee. So yeah, you should expect to see figures of these sorts on quotes given to you by installers. So if you're a community centre, I've mentioned that the assumptions that installers might make about your energy use, and also the assumptions that simple online models might make about your energy use, are not necessarily going to be totally accurate, because the energy use in a community building will often be quite different in terms of the patterns of when and how much and how regular that use is. The best thing is to be able to get hold of actual metering data from your building, ideally a year's worth. If you've got a commercial half-hourly meter or a smart meter, you should have that or be able to request half-hourly metering records that you can then use and feed into some of the more complicated models, or give to an installer and ask them to use it in calculating their quote. Otherwise, you might want to either model your energy use or install an energy monitor and wait to collect data that can then be used to accurately work out how much energy you're using and how well it would mesh with solar PV. If you are installing an energy monitor, then it's a very simple process. It doesn't involve electricians or anything like. It's just, if you see in the picture there, a CT clamp which clips around the cables coming into your meter. But you'll want to choose one that is able to record and store data rather than just showing you an instant display. We've used Open Energy Monitor and Effigy in the past, but there's a number of different ones that should work. If you're thinking about putting EV charging in or electrifying your heating in future, as Al was talking about, this might be a good time to include that, to make some assumptions. You could add, if you're modeling your use, or if you've got data, either way you could model a little bit about how much EV, electric vehicle charging point energy you'll use, or how much extra electricity your heating system will use. Factor it in at this point. I will leave it there, but I'm very happy to discuss this further and take any questions at the end of the session. And thanks for bearing with me while dropping in and out.
Fantastic. Thank you, Benny. Thanks so much for persevering with that. There's so much technical information, isn't there? So if people have got questions, please do put them in the Q&A, and we will have a bit of time at the end to really sort of go through a bit more detail and for you to pitch your questions to our panel. So don't worry too much. Do keep those questions in mind and put them in the Q&A if you want to already. So now I'll be handing over to Gavin and Sue King-Smith. So Gavin and Sue have been very involved with the Keir, Penpont and Tynron Development Trust micro hydro scheme. So again, they've got a really informative, very detailed presentation to show us, to get into all the nitty gritty, which I hope will be beneficial for other people who want to consider something similar. So Gavin and Sue, I shall hand over to you. Hopefully we'll have no issues this time.
Hello, it's nice to be here. I don't know if anybody can hear me just while we get the screen sharing fixed. If you can't, let me know.
We can hear.
You can hear. Okay, great. Right.
Can you see the screen all right?
We can, that's great.
Okay, all right. Well, up at the top it says KPT, that's Keir, Penpont and Tynron. They're three tiny communities in the Southern Uplands. It's hill farm agriculture, forestry, tourism, and now wind farms. The little pictures down here show, this is where we are. You can hardly see, but there are three communities there, never mind. These are our local claims to fame. The pedal bicycle was invented in Keir. Not many people know that. Here is a stone cone by Andy Goldsworthy, a famous sculptor who lives in Penpont. And this is Tynron Doon, which is a local beauty spot. There's been no inward investment into this area. It's an aging community and the population is dropping. It's 1,100, different from Portobello, half what it was 50 years ago. And we've now got wind farm money coming in to the community councils locally. And the KPT Development Trust was set up to use it for legacy projects. This is the office in Penpont, to encourage businesses and people to come in and to enable people to stay in their homes. The hydro scheme was its first major project, and it was 90% funded by Scottish Power Energy Networks Green Economy Fund, like the Portobello scheme, and the remainder came from wind farm income, and it involved loans. But this means that all the income from the feed-in tariff and PPA goes to the Development Trust for Community Projects. I'll hand over to Gavin.
So what is the scheme? I'll give you some details. The objectives we set out to achieve with this were to generate clean electricity and sell it. We reckoned we'd be able to generate 112 megawatt hours a year. That's equivalent of about 30 houses' consumption of electricity, excluding heating. And it would provide income for the Development Trust projects for up to 100 years, or possibly even more, of 12,000 a year, which would be inflation proof and dependent on the price of electricity. It's actually more than that already in our first year and a half. What is it? It's a 30 kilowatt generator connected to the grid by a controller that controls both the grid connection and the turbine. It's a Turgo type turbine, which is small and efficient for a relatively high head power scheme. The pipeline, called Penstock, is 1,500 meters roughly of high density polyethylene pipe. It's about 300 millimeters in diameter. Takes water from a catchment area of about 2 square kilometers. It was built, installed, and is now being maintained technically by Breaks Hydropower. What did it cost? The feasibility stage and getting permissions cost us around £10,000. It could have been a lot more if it hadn't been for considerable community input into obtaining those permissions. The build was £190,000, and that was covered almost completely by the Green Economy Fund. Operations and maintenance, we reckon, will cost about £2,500 a year, and that includes an allowance for replacing parts over the years. We obviously will at some stage have to replace various components of the scheme, so we've made an allowance for that, but we will still net more than 12,000 a year, as I say, increasing. For those of you that don't know much about hydropower schemes, I'll just run through this very quickly. Here's a watercourse in blue. It's actually, in our case, 2 small burns, but we'll come to that. You take water into a pipe, buried pipe, that's the black line, black dotted line, down to a turbine which generates electricity. The water is then returned to the burn via a tail race. So it's just this reach here between the intake and the turbine that is somewhat depleted. That's controlled by SEPA, as they require, obviously, to keep it in a good state, to keep water in it. So the whole system is controlled to ensure that we don't take too much water. In this case, in this example, we've got 50 meter fall in 300 meters. With our scheme, it's 68 meters in about 1¼ kilometers. So here's our scheme. You can see the blue pipeline coming down from 2 burns, 2 separate catchment areas up here, through screens, which screen out debris coming down the burn. We had huge amounts of, leaves this year, but they can be brushed off by a local resident who comes and cleans it every now and again when it is when there's a lot of debris. The pipe is buried. You can see it here coming down through fields. These are grazing fields along here. It's buried, that's it. While we were putting it in, it's now covered over by grass and being heavily grazed. Here's our turbine house, which is just outside the village of Penpont, in a little area that we bought from the local landowner. That's it, it's about 3 by 3 meters square. Okay, I think we'll move on to the time scales. So you can go through these.
Well, it started really when Gavin and I, with lots of amateur and professional help, built our own micro-hydro scheme on the Appin Burn in the Shingle Glen, just above Tynron. The irony is that it has to be grid connected over the last few days. That's been a pity. However, after we built it, Gavin looked at watercourses and contours on maps and decided there were many possible schemes in the area. We sent letters to local people with potential schemes and invited them to a meeting in the local village hall to explain how it could be done. And by 2013, there are now over 50 private schemes built in Dumfries and Galloway. Penpont Burn later became the community hydro. That was one, but a CARES funded feasibility study found it non-viable, and I'll come back to why. However, the next thing was that in March 2018, the KPT Development Trust was set up, and a renewables group within the trust looked again at the hydro scheme and found that it was viable. We really wanted it because it was good for creating energy, reducing carbon use, and it was also going to provide money for projects. And the scheme had failed on 3 grounds, and I'm going into this in a little bit of detail because anybody else might find the same thing. The feasibility study had found that there was not enough water, that the slope wasn't steep enough, and the grid was overloaded locally, so no grid connection would be possible. By September 2018, we had established that there was enough water. The feasibility study had omitted one area of catchment, which admittedly was a very tricky area with streams going, did they go this way? Did they go that way? And we checked with local knowledge and we walked it, and we found that all the streams actually did flow into our scheme. So there was enough water. And we checked this with the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. They agreed. Then the steepness was borderline, but we looked in the small print on SEPA and we found that it would be okay if the scheme was a community one. Well, it was. Also, if the area had to score low on the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivations Access to Services category. And amazingly, it did. And then the third thing was that the income had to be used to improve that deprivation. And we could cite the KPT Development Trust projects for this. So that was the problem with SEPA. Then there was the problem with the grid, but Gavin had got to know a person in Scottish Power during a mooting of making a smart grid to control voltage. And he said that because the scheme was in Penpont, the generated power would be used by local houses and would never need transporting on overloaded cables or to go to an overloaded substation. So grid connection would be possible. Okay, but then we wanted the FIT, which has been mentioned before. This would double our income from 6,000 to 12,000, and it was coming to an end on the 31st of March, 2019, i.e. in 6 months' time. So in those 6 months, we had to get planning permission. Oh yeah, right, yeah. We had to get a SEPA license, planning permission, and a grid connection offer. And for the SEPA license, we needed surveys, bat surveys, fish surveys, and the fish surveys were coming to an end at the end of September, but the local fisheries board fitted one in for us. And we needed a spec, a fully designed and costed spec for the scheme. And luckily we found 3 micro hydro installers. They're a bit of a rare breed, and they produced good tenders in short order. And best of all, we found the Green Economy Fund, which might fund 90% of the costs. So yeah, by December 2018, we had all that. And then come March 2019, because all those things needed a lot of lead time, that all these were in place, and we were ready for pre-accreditation to the FIT. So this was all successful, and it should have been go, but it took until February 2020 for the certificate of title for the land to be granted, and then we had COVID. But our installers lived as a bubble and worked outside, and they completed the scheme in a record 3 months. And the scheme was constructed in that time and commissioned on the 6th of October 2020.
So what other microhydro potential is there in southern Scotland? Firstly, for communities, you need to be near a watercourse, obviously, for hydropower. These can either be high head schemes, which means a steep fall of a relatively small run, or low head schemes, which are a large river, perhaps running through your community, but not very much fall of water. I'm going to put up this map because it represents many of the schemes that I've outlined, looked at basically as a desktop survey, looking at maps of where there might be schemes. Many of them have been implemented, not through my doing, but through other people's doing. But there are still many, many more which are potential hydropower schemes. The problems, the main constraints on doing anything are the grid, which is saturated in Dumfries and Galloway anyway, mainly because of wind farms. And it is not possible to connect in many, many places. We were lucky because we could, as Sue said, prove that our electricity would all be consumed before it ever reached the main part of the grid. That may be the case in your area. You would need to find a Scottish Power Energy Networks engineer to confirm it. But yes, there is a lot of potential around, and maybe one day some of it will be achieved. Of course, there have been hydro schemes from well over a century. It was one of the first sources of electric power in the area. Okay, let's move on to what lessons have we learned during our project?
Right. Well, the first obvious thing was the feasibility study, and ours needed review. So what's the lesson from that? Well, question things, check with local knowledge, have the courage of your convictions, or in this case, my husband's, and go over it again. Nothing that I'm going to say about lessons is going to be of anything new to anybody, but anyhow, it's worth going over them. Finance, you do need money in advance. So you need to organise loans or think of a community share offer or an upfront grant, such as we had, although ours didn't, ours had to be applied for every month, but that was okay. Watch the grant givers, keep an eye on Funding Scotland, this has been said before, and exploit government and industry community support to the full. Our big problem was permissions, and we had to have 3, environment and fish, and SEPA. And it's worth remembering that borderline conditions such as slope acceptability can be allowed if A, the scheme is a community one, B, scores one on the SIMD, geographic access to services. And remember that fish surveys may be seasonal. What was the lesson? Read the small print and allow time for surveys. The grid connection may be limited. This has been mentioned a lot. You contact your local district network operator, DNO. Think of ways of using energy without involving the grid, e.g. air source heat pumps to heat houses. Various other things. You need to think of some, or you could be a local grid and become, oops, sorry, that's gone too far, become a supplier to your local community, but that is has one or two problems about it. Planning permission, we didn't have any problems, but you do need a long lead time, and you do need very detailed engineering style drawings and experience. So the lesson is really to have experienced designers. Legal problems. Well, as I said, we had a lot of delay in getting certificate of title. We didn't really work out a solution to this. You said choose your solicitors carefully, but and maybe the answer is to badger them, as we did for a year, or maybe the answer is to leave them alone and they'll get on with it. I don't know. What else? Construction and delivery risks. You might have awkward terrain. You might all take longer than you expect. We were lucky, the terrain was easy and we had excellent digger drivers, and some of it was quite exciting. But we didn't actually come across any problems. The road closures, we had to have road closure for grid connection, and we had to organise the delivery of vast, huge, long pieces of pipe. The answer to that was to anticipate things and give lots of notice. The community, well, there is often inertia in the community to anything like this happening. People objected to the possible noise, and the answer to that was to explain, to hold meetings, to demonstrate what was going on. We found actually that people really like seeing the grid, the output of the scheme. We have it a monitor in the window of the turbine house, and people walk their dogs up there and look at it. What else? No, that's it.
That's it. What resources are there for developing micro-hydro schemes? Well, funding, we've talked a bit about. Keir's feasibility studies. You can get full payment for your feasibility study. Really worth doing it properly, finding a good supplier to do that, and funding Scotland to identify new sources of funding. You have to keep an eye on them. Developers, there are still various small firms, but fewer than there were since the feed-in tariff went, because hydropower schemes are costly to build. They're certainly worthwhile in the long term for many reasons, but we do have some contacts, and you're happy to talk to us about. Income. You will need a power purchase agreement to sell your electricity. Although Benny was talking about 5p a unit, or 5p a kilowatt hour for solar on the government scheme, yes, that's the case, but you can actually get a better price than that going through for a power purchase agreement with an electricity supplier. You need to renegotiate every year though, so it's quite a bit of admin work. Or there is this other alternative coming up, which I don't think many people have done, is to set up yourselves as an electricity supplier and sell your electricity direct to the community. And there are certainly great benefits in doing that because of the price difference between retail and wholesale, as Benny mentioned again. Existing communities have got experience of hydropower schemes. Not, I think we're the only one in Dumfries and Galloway as a community scheme. but there are others in Scotland and in England. And the two trade associations, main one is the British Hydropower Association, which mainly deals with much larger schemes and internationally. And the Micro Hydro Association, which we set up in 2010, just to help people get onto the feed-in tariff with the issues there. And that's it. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you so much, Gavin and Sue. I think we were quite ambitious trying to fit as much as we did into just 1 hour. I'm sure we could do an hour on each and every one of our speakers today. So there isn't a great deal of time for any questions. If anybody in the audience does have any questions for our panelists, and we don't have time today, do email me and I can pass them on. If you do want to stay on for just 1 or 2 more minutes, for those who can, we have just got one question, so it's a quick fire round to each and every one of you. If you could have one piece of advice to a community organisation starting out on their renewables journey, what would that be? So if we start with Gavin and Sue. You're on mute.
We're thinking about
We haven't
it.
Say that again, sorry, we didn't catch that.
Can't particularly pick on one of those things. Maybe get the community on side would be the start.
And I would add, you need somebody in the community with hundreds of hours spare.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Benny, on to you.
It's really hard to pick, but I'll go with think about your site early on, because so many other things depend on the site. It's really easy to put a lot of work and time and thought into other parts of a project, but until you know where it could be, then there's so many issues that you can't actually start to work through, like about the land ownership, about the grid connection, about the exact output you're going to get. So site is key. Okay,
good one. And Al, on to you.
Very briefly, thank you. I would say get as much advice, external advice, professional advice as possible, and that the cheapest quote isn't always the best one to go with. In our case, actually, we probably went with the most expensive, but we chose a company that we knew was going to last, and we knew that it had a history of working with community groups, and that we potentially had we could have future involvement with, so that there was continuity and everything fitted together well.
Great. Well, I really am so grateful to you all for joining us today. Thank you for trying to fit so much in. I think this is an issue we're going to revisit so much. It's so relevant and so needed. So I'm sure we'll be seeing you all again, I hope. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Sorry, we're a little bit over, but this will be recorded, so it'll be on YouTube and Vimeo very soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Amy. Bye-bye.
Thank you.